Hello, this is the Aubrey Night. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out to me. The best way to do this is through email and YouTube. Now, I'm on many different platforms. It won't be hard to find me. And also, word of mouth is immensely important. So feel free to spread the word about the Hovering Light. Now, on to the topic of choice here. Now, what I'm going to do is round up everything about the show and the source of which Legion is based upon. All right, let's continue this out and go on this journey. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to take a different point of view, or different perspective than I was talking about, breaking it down from adaptation to actual source, and just go with the overall themes that I saw, the differences in between Legion, the series, and X-Men Legacy is what it's based upon, loosely. So the series was really focused in on the aspects of the existential, the artistic, and whimsical. Alright, so what do I mean by this? Okay, so when we go into the tapeworm, the Shadow King, that is represented in Legion, everything that they are referring to, the way the demeanor and the whole aspects of it is very, philosophical, and the explanations of their character development and why David had the life and everything else, and the call to actions that happened in his pursuit of everything. Okay, so let's address this. Alright, so the Shadow King and the Tapeworm really present themselves way more into mid to later and wrap up everything in the series. And they are both vying. They are both. It evolves into the aspects that they've been vying for David's psychological instability his whole life, and they both present the questions when they're both going around and doing and commencing in the chaos that they are doing. They both say, well, the difference between us and humans is that we don't question things. We don't have, we don't ask, we don't have empathy. We are solely going based upon the way that we are, I guess you could say from this point of view, equipped or made or designed, right? And they use a lot of different examples to hold up that logic. Alright, so they go into these aspects of, for example, there is a tick. They show a tick and then they show a dog or something like that, right? Well, I'm talking about the particular breed of dog here. Well, I guess that's a little bit more detail oriented, but I proved to one. I think it was like a blood. Not a bloodhound, but basset hound or something like that. Okay, and I say, well, the flea in the series says the flea goes on heat and all this thing of it just goes on what it's designed to do. And then the basset hound it gets its senses and everything with what's surrounded by him. They never question, why are you doing this to me? It's just the way that the primitive aspects of how things flow within how they are. And so also that example, I don't know if somebody was either the writers or the actors or whatever took that from inspiration, but I will reiterate this again. So some time back, I talked about this particular poem by Robert Frost, and it's called Design. And so the poem is very short, but it says a lot without going into these long prose and everything else to describe. All right, so it pretty much begs the question to the reader: what happens to the aspects of animal instinct and how animals are perceived in nature when humans put emotional aspects or empathy onto the actions that insects, animals, does categorize them up, what they do. So you walk in, you see that it's centered around a spider, and the spider, what essentially the spider doing in the poem is catching its prey. And the way that it catches its prey is not really, that's the way that it's designed to eat in order to survive. There should not be any sort of, emotional or like, yeah, this is good, this is bad to it. That's just the way it is. But see, that's clever. Is that the difference is, and what's so clever about it is begging the question, the aspects of the misfortunes that can happen when humans put emotional empathy on something where it's misplaced. And so, saying this, the way in which they describe everything, they say, well, the Shadow King and the Tapeworm, well, we are just merely doing what we're designed to do. And that what's interesting with humans is they are tier than this, and that's why they have all the issues that they have. And so they go on into this whole aspects of conspiracies, and this whole aspects of having the issues and explaining the problems with being delusional. And they show the way that it is set up, and then they go into the scene is very artistic and pragmatic at the same time. So it's essentially set up in the way in which there is an impressionable. First, there's an impressionable young man or young man, and he's teaching him. The Shadow King is teaching him, which is the Australian actor that I mentioned. I don't, I'm just talking and just if y'all if you are interested in knowing him. Well, you know what? Let me just do this, okay? So to save some more time here. So Legion. Okay, so let me get into Jermaine Clement. His name is Oliver Bird, but it's known that he is the Shadow King. Well, I'm sorry. No, he's the... I'm sorry, I got this switched out. So the Shadow King is Nadiv Negban, which he is the Shadow King. And then Oliver Bird is essentially his henchman, or like they go in between. They're in between, they're parasites. Okay, so that's what they are. All right, that's what. Let's break it down. But omit that the correction. The real Shadow King is this Nadiv person. Okay. All right. So Jermaine Clement. All right. Which is Oliver. Okay. So Oliver. All right. So they show him a lot in the series, Oliver. All right. So let's go back to this particular case here. All right. So, like I said, with the impressionable young man. All right. So he is essentially setting him up with the aspects of purposely teaching him something that is adamantly wrong. So it is a visual call of his character, and it's a visual call of what their intentions are. Okay. And how the aspects of human intelligence and human emotion is what helps to remedy everything that comes to pass towards the series, towards the progression of the series. So he shows this young man, and he asks it. He shows different elements. So first he shows, okay, red means go and green means stop. And he is reiterating this until he knows that it's synced into his mind that this is reality of situation, right? That's delusional to think that, in a real world sense, and then being among other people in society, they will look at you like there's something wrong with you, because that's not how things work. That's not how things play out in reality. Like, if you want to be a part of society, it's acceptable to understand that when you see, especially when we're getting in the aspects of safety and protection, when you see something flashing that is red, you stop. And when you see something flashing that is green, then you can commence of going. And so it sets him up, and it tells him he sees something red, so he goes, and then somebody hits him. So that cuts to another scene, and it's implementing Oliver's intentions about what he actually is. And so with the Shadow King, the way he presents himself as in the aspects of, very suave, sophisticated, the master of manipulation, okay? And his worldly instincts are what are supposed to deter you from his misdoings, his evil doings, right? And so because of this, is supposed to help to allure you into the intentions of why is he the Shadow King. And then we go on and to get some more explanations why David and who was set up to be with his adopted family. They call it, and then who the origin of his family and who they actually were. And so towards the end of the series, you find out that it leaks into the whole question being answered, the origin of origin and sins of the father. So essentially what it is a thing where, because the father originally, all the way back, it looks as far as they play a lot with time, and that's intentional too. Looks like it's around the time you can say that when the first, maybe in between the First World War and the Second World War. And so this is essentially setting up the aspects that, why you can say and explain why you can say that David Hall is actually a god, because, if he was in the realm of, keeping up with linear time, he would be our old man, but he's not. So, here we go. That's another element of explanation to who David Haller is, right? And so, he finds the Shadow King, and the Shadow King is unleashed upon the earth, as far as the aspects of sin being unleashed upon the earth, metaphorically speaking, all right? And so it dispenses this, and everything is wrapped up and understood that essentially we get and understand that his parents were the precursor to why David and his pursuits of his love interest and how things play out. Because we learn and we find out that David's mom was mentally unstable, right? And that's a key factor into the element in David's state of being, of how the Shadow King was able to lure himself into being a present in David's life, to being attached to him, being a parasite attached to him, at birth, and all of this. Because, when his mom was, stable, and both of them got out of the war, but he was in the war for a different reason, because of injuries from the war. That's what it's alluded to, and they go home. But the problem is that David's father is always away, and so his mom is always left alone, and his mom is left alone, and because of that innate irrational fear, and that's when the Shadow King comes in and That's how it explains how David was his whole life battling with all these internal demons. But David figured out about being a time traveler, and he was trying to stop it. But essentially, it didn't work out in his favor. But they wrap it up with a neat bow, and they have it to where things play itself out, and to where the Shadow King himself he evolves and understands his wrongdoing. So he goes to himself in a state of before he realized his wrongdoing and shows him, hey, look, this is what all the chaos you have endured. And it allows them, the Shadow King, to come to terms, and everything cease. And the Shadow King grants David the opportunity to, the central be reborn again, which is actually interesting. But I don't know. It's one of those things where I think the means in which they loosely based upon their inspiration, X-Men Legacy, the way in which it's presented is a lot better, because it seems as if in the series they're pushing an agenda. They want this whole aspects of artistically showcasing that there is a means to an end in some way, shape, or form when it doesn't look like it really is. And this whole aspects of, presenting everything that way is more artistically, again, represented with, there's a lot of whimsical song and dance throughout the series, and it even showcased itself in the end, in episode and in ending episodes and everything. All right, so let me go on to the actual source, which is X-Men Legacy. Now it's quite different, because X-Men Legacy is set up very succinct in the aspects of who, what, when, where, why, and how. And it's focusing in on the aspects of what, as I mentioned before, the problems with what hate and bigotry can do, and how it can be a cursor into the aspects of higher understanding about things. And so the way in which now Ruth and David are essentially the key figures and the central figures, when we get into the aspects of X-Men Legacy. Okay? And it's very clear and it's very precise and set up to that, okay, this was David Haller is actually, Xavier's son. And it's interesting because in the series, now David's mother in the series says her last name is Xavier. And so it alludes to, oh, well, hey, that's something. Xavier, you mean from the X-Men? Oh, okay. But it's apparent, and it's apparent that David Haller is battling quite heavily with these demons and his mental instability throughout the comic book because of the passing his father, Xavier. And he's trying to pretty much sort all these things out in his own way. And the way in which Ruth and the way in which they are together and the way in which they see things and address things, it also calls to action to the aspects of the X-Men in themselves and the cause in which they are. And so what am I saying about these things? So, all right, so the bigotry. All right, so Luca is really showcasing how embedded and deep-rooted these issues are, and the society and the society of humans in which David is living in. All right, so he comes and he presents himself. He says, "Hey, man, to a religious sect," and he says, "Hey, I have. Let me tell you my sin," because they come across as very welcoming and understanding, but when it is turned and found out that any association with a mutant is just the worst offense, and they want to buy for your life, which means end your life. And so David in himself understands this, and then that's why Ruth is with him, so they can track them down and get rid of these things and be punishable for their actions. And so a division of to defend and be protective comes in, and they stop them. The division to help support the X-Men. All right, and they also within that, a lot of hidden secrets come to terms to where Ruth and David seem as if they are the ones to be a reflection of the change in which things can go about and how everything is already placed upon the status of how the X-Men are seen and in their place and their aspects of their actions of their call of duty. And so also this goes along the terms too of what I mentioned earlier when I said about Stan Lee and his aspects of his interpretation with addressing the civil rights movement and the leaders. And so, it goes on into the who, why, when, why, how about this by saying that essentially the mutants are the aspects of you should not, you should not address them as other. The humans should not see them as others. Humans should be having the stability of saying, accepting and welcoming. But at the same time, they also say it's also presented in this case that, look at your cause. Are you really helping? Right? Because some, on both sides, humans and mutants, when the passing of Xavier is calling to say, hey, look at them, they're in their ivory tower. They don't actually understand us as humans. They're just more in the way. And some mutants say, David is a threat to us because David doesn't understand the way that we do things, and this is how it was implemented. But David is really tearing at the core sense of understanding of their worldview, because David is calling them to see in the reflection as a reflective means that just because Xavier taught you and did this and took you in and built the school doesn't mean that's the right way to solve very complex issues and the means of violence and nonviolence. I'm here even though I'm mentally unstable, and that is a paradox and a paragram of life. Like, I'm the most powerful being, but I could be, even more powerful if it weren't for this, mental state that I'm struggling with. And you see this throughout the comic book, him battling through that and working through that and trying to find all these different solutions to help solve and resolve different problems that present himself, where his father would have probably done, would have done something that he deems as this term where a good doer. So what is a good doer? And I'm going to end on this. So a good doer is essentially this, all right? Which, unfortunately, that is the case a lot of times with how mainstream representation is presented. Most people say and do things and commence and say this. They have this goalpost mentality. Well, at least I'm not doing this. I could be doing all these things, but I'm not doing it. Well, yeah, you shouldn't be doing it. These bad things to just because somebody else delves in and does all these different devices like consumes himself with alcohol, drugs, has a really bad habit of cigarettes, or doesn't have bad impulse control, like poor eating habits or whatever. You shouldn't be doing those things. Those are terrible. But because I don't do these things, and I have good intentions, but I really want somebody else to. I give to things, but I really don't. I really make other people, feel bad because they're not ready to do something quite yet to be called to action to do something that, in their own time they'll get there, and not understanding that. But you don't actually do it yourself, but you make other people feel guilty who are honest enough to say, admit or showcase that, and then in their time they'll get there. But you haven't actually done anything, but you present yourself as if you do to help solve complex issues. And then not understanding that, sometimes things aren't very straightforward. It takes a whole lot of time and understanding to fix very, very complex things, for the aspects of policies and rule and order in American society. A lot of people, unfortunately, don't understand that. Which I think, as a side note, when there are countries who implement, it's the aspects of some form of civic duty that you must endure in order to be a part of society, or as a common of terms. I think that would help a lot with so many issues that are going on in the American culture at this time. But that's another issue within itself. All right. So, and then, talking and speaking upon things also, that's another thing. People, presenting themselves as, they are the rallier of truth, because their way of life or their perceived reality is the way other people that they think that they're speaking for thinks. And it's just, what are we doing here? And those elements are very much presented in the aspects, to me, from my point of view, in the X-Men Legacy series that wasn't translated in the adaptation television series Legion. And I think that's what's nice. I mean, about, finding out the source of what something that is part of main culture, pop culture, the original source, and then going back and seeing the adaptation and see what they do with it. Now, overall, on the other hand, I'm not pretty much interested when they have agendas to not have the respect that they need to have when it comes to, adaptations, just like with the Odyssey that is coming out, and a lot of different things that have came out in the wake of the Odyssey, when they push agendas that just doesn't need to be there. But that's another issue within itself. And these are, to wrap up everything, these are, showcase, issues about how prolific cultural value has to shape our society in the way in which it's progressing or not, Well, that's all I got. I would deeply like to know what you all think. Feel free to reach out to me. Email is much appreciated, and also YouTube comments are much appreciated. And if you would like for me to actually make comments, talk on my show, about what you have to say, or you want me to present you on my show, I will do that, because I've done it before. All right, just let me know. All right, so this reaches the end of the Hovering Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care out there. Bye-bye for now.